everyone, welcome back to Firsthand Globetrotting. There's a lot to see and do in Washington, D.C., and no matter when you go, you'll probably have a great time. But if you're lucky, your trip may overlap with one of the most popular annual events in the city, the Cherry Blossom Festival. I've had the chance to go to it a few times and it's always been great. So today, I'll tell you what the festival has to offer and show you all the amazing sights and events. It all started way back in 1912 when the government of Japan gifted DC with some Japanese cherry trees. The trees were planted around the Tidal Basin, and every year when they bloom, it turns that area into a beautiful cherry blossom wonderland. Nearly as long as the trees have been there, they've been holding the Cherry Blossom Festival to celebrate. It's a 3-week festival that takes place from late March into April. But as a tourist, it's actually a really tough event to plan your trip around. The problem is the peak bloom of the cherry blossoms usually lasts a week or less, and you can never be sure exactly when it will be. The weather plays such a huge role in the bloom that even slight variations can change when it happens. So if you want to see the fully blooming trees, your trip needs to be flexible so that you can go to DC on a few days' notice. As I said before, most of the trees are around the Tidal Basin, so that's where you'll want to be. The great thing about the Tidal Basin is that there's a little walking path and bridges all around it, so you can do a complete loop. But because it's such a small path, if there are big crowds, it gets really packed. And there's almost guaranteed to be huge crowds for peak bloom. It's a super popular event and draws thousands of visitors every year. So if you can, try to get there as early in the morning as possible and visit on a weekday. There'll still be people there, but it'll be a lot more peaceful and relaxed. As you walk around the Tidal Basin, it's really nice to just look across the water and see all of the blossoms. Plus, there are famous monuments all around it. One of my favorite things to do is to take a break and sit on the steps of the Jefferson Memorial. There are lots of really cool things to see around the basin, so it makes the walk even more impressive. As you can probably see, it's pretty much blooming cherry trees everywhere you look, so you shouldn't have much trouble finding some great views. If you don't have the flexibility to wait around for the trees to bloom, that's okay. There are a few cherry blossom events every year that you can plan your trip around. The first is the Blossom Kite Festival. Basically, they turn the entire National Mall into a giant kite playground. There isn't much of a schedule to it, you can just show up with a kite and do your own thing. And that's the best part of it. It doesn't matter if you know what you're doing, you just find a spot and try your best. It's a pretty great experience to get to fly a kite out on the National Mall with all of the Smithsonian museums, famous monuments, and government buildings everywhere you look. But the busiest spot was right under the Washington Monument. It's an amazing monument by itself, but it was an even cooler experience to see all the kites flying around it. There were so many kites in the air, almost like a flock of birds in the sky. Even if you don't have a kite, it's still great to just walk around down there and see everything flying over top of you. And there were plenty of vendors selling kites in case you want to buy one and give it a try. Plus, since it usually happens before the peak bloom, you'll be able to see some of the cherry trees at the base of the Washington Monument in their early stages of bloom. The next major event they have is the Cherry Blossom Festival Parade. And who doesn't like a parade, right? I'll be honest, a lot of the stuff going by is pretty generic parade content. There are plenty of marching bands walking along and playing songs, dancers and flag twirlers going along with the music, members of various branches of the military marching along in unison, big floats rolling around that advertise and promote various things, and of course, huge balloons of cartoon characters being slowly led down the street by an army of people holding the ropes. They even had a celebrity appearance from the honorary Grand Marshal of the parade. But there were also some things that were specifically related to the cherry blossoms and their link to Japan. Some of the floats were by different Japanese businesses, cultural groups, and organizations. And they had some huge cherry blossom balloons floating down the parade route, showing off the biggest symbol of the festival. There wasn't as much Japanese or cherry blossom themed stuff as I had hoped, but it still made for a nice day in the sun enjoying a parade. The last festival event I'll show you is Petal Palooza. Every year they turn an area of the DC waterfront into a cherry blossom zone with decorations and things to do everywhere you look. Pretty much every area of free space is taken up by companies with booths giving away freebies and promoting themselves. But if you've had your fill of advertising, there are a few booths where you can try some creative artwork techniques. And there's an area with games where you can do some fun stuff like roller skating on the pier. Like any good springtime event, they have plenty of live music throughout the day on stages scattered around the waterfront. The thing I liked the most about it is that they had free boat tours of DC that you could take. Pulling away from the pier, you get a great view of Petal Palooza and everything that's going on along the waterfront. It made for a really nice scenic trip, and it was nice to get away from all the crowds for an hour or so. There are blooming trees along the shoreline, and you get a nice taste of Washington in the spring. And as you go up the Potomac River, you get views of Virginia on one side and DC on the other. But the highlight is definitely getting to see some of the famous monuments from the water. The one you get closest to is the Lincoln Memorial, with all the steps leading right up from the water. You can also see the Jefferson Memorial a little further away and the top of the Capitol building in the distance. And of course, there's the Washington Monument towering over the city. I've always been a sucker for boat tours, so this was a nice little freebie that let me see DC by water. Overall, Petal Palooza was a great excuse to get out and enjoy the waterfront areas of DC in the sunshine. So that's the National Cherry Blossom Festival in Washington, D.C. In my opinion, seeing the trees in peak bloom is a must. It's just so amazing how beautiful the Tidal Basin gets with all the blooming cherry trees. And it's even more incredible how quickly the bloom comes and how quickly it goes. Even if Mother Nature makes it hard to time your trip, the other major events are pretty fun and give DC a nice festive atmosphere. Some good family fun to kick off the start of spring. If you have any questions about the festival, ask me in the comments. And while you're at it, like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel. On Instagram, I'm Firsthand Globetrotting. On Twitter, I'm Firsthand Globe. Follow me on there. And don't forget, it's an incredible world out there, so pick up your passport and do some firsthand globetrotting of your own.